Well, all right. I guess we now have all systems go, hopefully. That took a little while, a little bit of unexpected things to deal with, but here we are, right? Eco 100 on this bright, cold January morning. I hope we're in the Eco 100, right? Okay, so, you know, I'm not all that stressed out about starting a tad bit late because of the technical stuff, because we're going to take it easy today. And I'm going to do the usual thing where I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the subject of economics and just kind of tell you about what I'm expecting you to sort of know in the class and all that, and how things are going to flow, all of that stuff. So I'll show you how some of this works in a second. I did throw up some readings there for you. It's pretty light stuff. And I tend to, not be someone who has hard deadlines for all of these things. And there's a simple homework there, which really is just, can you point and click? And this is what the homework system looks like. So it's not, it's kind of an easy, just figure it out homework. Question, yes?
I'm not familiar with Top Hat. Do you know what that is?
I do know what that is. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Top Hat today. Suffice it to say for now, that is our system through which we'll run homework and reading and all that stuff. And if you continue through economics, or I guess several other courses of study now, they also use Top Hat. So you should just have to buy it once. And in fact, some of you probably already purchased it if I'm not entirely mistaken. So anyway, so my name is Matthew Baker. This is Eco 100. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, this is I think it's my 20th year at Hunter. Actually, maybe that will start in the fall. Prior to that, I was a faculty member at the United States Naval Academy. So it was kind of an interesting culture shift there. But most of my research, as you'll find out through the course of the semester, I can't resist bringing in some things that I'm talking about or working on my own, has to do with economic anthropology. You might already wonder what that is. Law and economics, right? The sort of intersection of the legal world and economic activity. And some of the classes I've taught, actually History of Economic Thought is my other class that I teach, where we kind of go way back into ancient Greece and all that stuff, actually even further back. And we talk about how people started thinking about the economy, what it does, what it's supposed to do, and things like that. I also have some interest nowadays in econometric methods. So there's a word you probably maybe are hearing for the first time, econometrics, right? In terms of, we'll get into all of this stuff as we go through the class here. In terms of prerequisites for the course, you just really don't need to know much math. Addition, subtraction ought to do it. Maybe knowledge of a spreadsheet program. I'll use Google Sheets occasionally. That's really just about it, right? That you know how to do those very simple math. And so, maybe what I'll do is I'll just jump right to the syllabus here and just kind of show you. I guess that's you can read it on your own. I did not print it out, by the way. The expectation is that you would go to the course Brightspace page, or, even better, the course Top Hat page. I'll get to that in a second. And you'll read it there. One of the nice things about this is that I can kind of update it as we go along. Actually, a student actually caught a mistake on the syllabus already, which I fixed, about the course meeting time. But there you can see, the basic stuff for the course, our meeting time. There's my email address. That's the single best way to contact me. But you're also welcome to roll by my office, which has changed this semester. So there's another thing. It's 1526. Though now I'm using a Mac here, which I'm not used to. 1526 Hunter West. I'm usually here business hours, from I guess 8 o'clock-ish on to about 3 or 4. So you can always drop by or come by at a time that seems, if you want to set up a time, we can do that as well. Just in terms of the course stuff, you'll see here, Top Hat account, you'll need that for the course. And I'll talk about that in a second. The other software we will be using is Gradescope for exams and stuff like that, and maybe some attendance exercises, more on that in a second. You don't need to know a lot about that right now. Basically what I do is I set up your Gradescope account, and then we'll take care of that when the time comes. Just usual stuff here. Homework, exams, 3 exams and some homework. The exams will just be here. I try to keep them short so we can get in and out pretty quickly. More on that in a second. And you'll notice I do have attendance here. I know it's an early class. We've actually discovered that students like early classes. It's kind of an interesting thing, right? I guess a lot of you might have jobs or, just want to, you're like me, you like to get up early. So I'm going to be taking attendance. I'm not exactly, I do it, in the past I've done it in a variety of different ways. We'll figure it out over time. Suffice it to say, maybe this week we'll take it a little easy on the attendance front. As we all figure it out, we have snow to deal with and all that stuff. Couple of other things about exams. Does this thing have a... No. They'll come about the logical times during the semester. I try to get the first exam in kind of earlier than I guess many of my colleagues do. Mainly that's just a, let you know where you stand type thing and get out in front of things before we have too much material to think about. The other thing that I'm just going to say is that it was interesting. This last semester was really the semester where the dam broke on AI and cheating and all that stuff. It was crazy. It was I'm director of the Graduate Studies Department. We had all kinds of things to deal with there. So things have changed a lot about how we're going to be doing exams and all of that. We're going to have to be a little bit stricter about things like going to the bathroom and calculator use. Nowadays you can get a calculator that has a camera on the back and, built-in AI and all that stuff. If you didn't know that, maybe I'm, kind of regretting forming you in on that. So we'll tighten up that a little bit, but still the idea is to make the, you'll see I have a pretty clear procedure where we do a review. So we'll spend a whole class reviewing for the exam. I'll give you a practice exam, we'll go over that, and then we'll have the actual exam. And the idea is that, I'm trying to remove as much uncertainty as possible about how the exam is actually administered, so you can just focus on the materials. So there is, we'll deal with that as the time comes. Anything else about here's the course outline. I think that's about it. Oh, one thing on contacting me. I would say, email is good, but I don't know why. Maybe I'm a little bit anal about this. I just like to have an email that's a little bit professional and structured, so I know who you are and that you're taking things seriously and you're not kind of wasting my time. And it's a big class, so one thing that kind of happens is oftentimes students ask you things that they could just as easily figure out themselves. Find it irritating. I'll still help you out, but mildly irritating. So up here, I have this email, sexyboy9951, when's the exam? No punctuation. My advice is maybe now is just a life skill too, is just start cleaning it up, right? Use a more professional email address, nicely spaced out emails, particularly these days with AI. You can just say, ChatGPT, this is what I want to write my professor. Here's a nice email. Give me a nice email that asks him when the exam is. And then I'll say, well, you know what? I just look at the notes and I look at the schedule to find out when the exam is. So you could also do that. Anyways, any questions about that? Any of the stuff, the administration? We don't have to have it all figured out today, right? Top Hat. I was going to show you Top Hat. Let me just take a quick look into the Top Hat system here. If in fact it worked. This is the problem here, right? All right, I'm going to have to turn that off. Is it working? It's kind of ominous. Try it again. It's worth it. It's kind of exciting to see the Top Hat site for the class. So while I'm doing this, I can tell you I think it was the very first day we got back to classes after the pandemic. I was they put me in the theater, is it the Playhouse? And that was kind of a surreal thing, being in the theater. But here I am again in another theater. It's interesting. I'm not used to standing up high like this. When I was in college, I had a class that was in a room like this, but it was like a movie theater. It was early in the morning. It was art history, and I just couldn't stay awake. The professor would say, "First slide, please," and that was it for me. Okay, so here we go. First of all, you can once you log in, you give Top Hat, you create an account, and through your school and all that stuff. If you have any problems with that, you can ask me for help. But once you get into the site, you can see there's a couple important things about the course when you get your account running. The first of which is just this join code, this 6-digit number. You can put that in, or you can search for the class itself on Top Hat. We'll see if it comes up here as we move along. Slow internet stuff. And as I say, almost everything will go through this site, all the course content, with one exception, and that's your grades. I typically use Brightspace to manage grades. Okay, so this is what it looks like for me. Maybe I can show you what you should see here. There was a student view. Let me see here. Okay. Anyways, this is kind of what if you look at the left-hand side here, this is kind of what you'll see here. I can't figure out how to get it into the student view. Let me try one other thing here. Don't want to do that. All right, well, anyways, you'll see the same stuff over here. Up there is the required reading. That's where the textbook will occur. You'll have these folders if you log into Top Hat. And then you'll see the homework there as well. You can see here I've just put in the first 3 chapters. Now within the chapters, there's questions for you to answer, and you can, just to make sure that you're following along with the reading. The homework, you can see, will look something like this. Let's see, I'll click on this. And yeah, so I told you, homework 1 is just a, get used to things and how they work. So, there's click on target questions and things of that nature. Okay, and so once you log into the account, you'll see how you'll be able to just kind of navigate and see how all this works. One other big thing here is there is this thing called where did I put it? It's kind of in the wrong place. It's this thing called the course, what I call the course matrix. That's kind of a big title for something that really is just a a catalog of what's going on in the class. And so what you can kind of see here is, and this is where you should go if you sort of, heaven forbid if you miss a class or something like that. So for every lecture, typically what I do is I put the date, I put the lecture notes there, a link to the notes that I'm talking about, and then I'm making a video such as it is. It's not going to be such a classic today, that's for sure, with the various things going on. The readings that I talked about are assigned, and then also whether or not there was any homework. And as the class sort of evolves, all of these links will come live, and we'll just sort of fill it out with everything that's going on. So if you ever get to a situation where you're like, well, I don't remember what was going on, or I need to brush up on this or that or the other thing, you can kind of go back and look at all the past stuff that we've done in the class here. And that's kind of, if you're uncertain about dates, I try to, or what's expected of you, I try to put all that stuff in the notes at the beginning of every class. Anyways, let's get back to this lecture here. If there's no questions, once again, we have there is a question. Go ahead.
Yeah. I looked at the syllabus last night and the topic too.
Uh-huh.
For example, your course outline, the title, Introduction to the Course, Efficiency, Economic Modeling.
Yep.
But on top head, just is the economic program, just different titles.
Yeah, they're not exactly the same,
So my concern just, we want to study in a head.
Oh, okay.
What to do, like?
Well, in that case, you can.
Just follow this website?
Yeah, I would stick with the website. As it happens, I was just kind of, what the heck is going on here? As I was just kind of, looking at that. Yeah, I sort of go through this and then I update because it's one of these things where I tinker with things every semester, and I don't know, I sort of change it as I go along, and then the next semester starts. So yes, I would follow this as kind of the live version of what's going on. The syllabus is good on course policy, but the content is kind of is best thought of as here. Yep, right there, chapters. So you see I have chapters 1, 2, and 3 there. And I'll just show you kind of what they look like, because we're a little bit proud of this. We put this is a book made explicitly for Hunter students, and it was basically, a couple questions in there, and as we move along, you'll see how it works. Okay. Anyways, let's dig in a little bit to economics and what it is and what I'm hoping to kind of do in this course for you and all that stuff. What is economics? There's the usual question you start off every class with. Well, what I can first tell you about this and how we define the subject is that it's evolved over time, and indeed the definition you're used to is probably, maybe not, but I'm assuming is probably the old one. And that you think of economics as something defined by its subject matter. That is to say, we're studying markets, the oil market. We're studying the market for a college education or the groceries, things like that, right? Who knows? That's all great, right? And we can study all of those things. But really what economics is about is more a methodological thing nowadays, right? And I'll talk about what that is in a second. So we have a certain way of thinking about things that defines economics, more so than whatever it is we study. Maybe I hinted at this a little bit earlier on when I talked about some of the things that I'm interested in, economic anthropology, economics of the law. I could have thrown some other things up there too, like economics of the family, health economics, stuff like that. So unique, or economics is somewhat unique among the social sciences in that our methodology is more or less the same. We all agree, all economists basically agree, there's some things that are a little bit different, about how we're going to attack a problem, how we're going to think about it. Right? That's unlike any other social science where people have different sorts of perspectives that they use to analyze problems. One of the interesting things about economics is also that it tends to be, or it can be, I should say, sophisticated in its mathematics and statistics. And I'm going to give you just a little hint of how that works today. But it's kind of neat in that you get this methodology which marries well with technical stuff. And it gives you in the end this I guess you could, it's a STEM subject, right? So everybody, that's the hot word these days, study STEM. You know, you have to do a STEM subject if you can. Well, economics is one of those, but the nice thing about it is you can do anything you want with it, right? You can analyze just about any problem you want with these, with the basic methodology and the associated statistical methods. Okay, well, what do economists study? All kinds of things here, and you know, it's my class, so I'm going to show you hopefully a couple of my papers that I've written and published in various places. Let's see if this works. I know we've been waiting around for various links to open all morning. Maybe we'll have more luck here. There we go. So this is the National Bureau of Economic Research website. We have a couple associates here on the faculty at Hunter and in the CUNY system in general that are on this thing here. So you can see some of the stuff. This is a great place to go if you just want to see what people are working on. And you can see, you know, this is a big subject, race, ethnicity, and economic statistics for the 21st century. But you can also, you know, we have returns to youth entrepreneurship training in Uganda. Noise pollution, right? That might be a little bit more unexpected. How noise pollution and house prices interrelate. And this is kind of a neat one because you can see that what the authors are doing is they're talking about the economic costs that noise pollution inflicts upon, I guess, house values, right? And it comes primarily from aircraft and traffic. And in the end, the idea is to sort of use a market outcome to place a value on something that you might not think is easily, you know, that you can easily affix a dollar value to. Maybe another one here. Can talk about, of course, everybody likes to talk about fintech and all that stuff. Of course, economics has something to say about that. The opioid epidemic and pain management. There's a lot of economic issues there. So there's a whole bunch of things you can talk about. I'm going to skip that link here, but maybe I'll open up my paper links. And these are some of my. I tend to be a little weird in the things I do, but you know what? One of the great things about being a faculty member is that you have the freedom to sort of do things that you think are interested, or sort of just follow your heart a little bit and think about different stuff here. So this was a paper that a colleague of, I don't know what just happened there, Lisa, who's a professor here as well, who does media economics, and I wrote. And it had to do with local news, and you'll see the term welfare estimation in the market for local television news. We don't mean welfare as in like the social service policy. We mean societal welfare, right? What society gets out of these things. And so something like what I was talking about with those, with housing prices and noise pollution, we use some methods here to figure out how valuable local news is to people, and whether or not there's too much or too little of it, right? And so that was kind of a fun project, and we did a lot of, you can see there's some fun diagrams in that paper. This was one of my favorites that I convinced my colleagues I was crazy when I did this. So this was about Civil War surgery, right? You probably have, I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Dances with Wolves. Everybody used to, 15, 20 years ago, you could count on everybody having seen that. But it was a U.S. Civil War movie where they had a scene with surgery, and maybe you know how that went. You had the saw, the bone saw. You just kind of give the patient some whiskey and just hack off their arm. So the impression is that Civil War surgery was not was a blunt instrument, and people tended to say that, well, actually the surgeons were killing the patients more than they were helping them. So I thought, well, it would be neat if you could ever test that. And I stumbled upon this observational data set where this guy found, this doctor sort of made a record of everybody who got surgery in their wounds, and then went back 15 days later, right, and saw whether or not they survived. Now, importantly, we'll talk about this a little bit when we talk about causality and how difficult it is to figure out if X really causes Y. Importantly, he also wrote down all the people who were wounded who did not get surgery, right? And so I was able in this way to use some techniques to compare outcomes for those who did and didn't get surgery. Just one last little example here. This was a paper I wrote when I was in graduate school, and it was basically a study of the emergence of land ownership, right at the, sort of think about hunter-gatherer societies and how they own land and the different ways in which they did. And I built this whole economic model of how it went, and I related it to some evidence, right, that I also put together. So some interesting, I guess, tangents there. Once again, it's my class, so I can, talk about things I like a little bit, right? Not too much, just a little. Bringing it all back home here, perhaps surprisingly, the most interesting thing about all of this, is that everything sort of follows from the same basic premise, right? And what is this premise? Well, it's about decision making, and it's about the fact that people who make decisions are confronted with scarcity. What does that mean? It means you can't do everything, right? Maybe a better way to say this, for purposes that will matter later in the class, is when you choose to do one thing, you can't do something else, right? And that implies everything you do is costly in some way, shape, or form, right? So that's premise number one, I guess you could say, or part one of the premise of economics. Part two would be then that when you decide what to do, you do so rationally, right? Rationally. Now that's a loaded word. What do I mean by that? I mean that you, at least to some degree in your mind, have some idea what these costs and benefits are from your various courses of action, and you choose the best one as you perceive it at the time, right? That's the premise. And whether you're talking about Civil War doctors and how they're administering surgery, right? Who gets it and who doesn't? Whether you're talking about hunter-gatherers and how rigorously they should enforce claims to land that they have, or if you're talking about the decisions of television stations and how they want to broadcast local news and whether or not they do. All of those decisions, right? You have to think about, well, what are they giving up when they decide to do this? How costly are these actions? Should they or shouldn't they? Now, a subtle point to be made about this is, at times we'll get pretty technocratic in discussing these things, but I think it's also important to emphasize that, there is this other side to economics that, in some sense, we can talk about engineering, right, and costs and benefits and computation, all of that stuff. But in another sense, we can sort of know what's going on in the background and realize that the best thing to do is to just stay out of it, right, and let things unfold as they will. It's an important thing to say, and I like to sort of liken this to the physics aspect of economics, right? We can engineer it, we can solve it, we can reduce problems to simple components. But then there's also this biological aspect, right? Where, you think about it this way. When you're not, you're thinking about an engineering system, that implies you can control it. Well, a biological system, you watch a nature show and it's always like, stay away, don't mess with it, right? Don't introduce any alien species to this ecosystem. It thrives if you leave it alone, right? And hopefully you'll see how the methods that we talk about allow us to think about things from both of these perspectives. Both are important. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. My slides now, I'm looking at them. I said that I like to change the content as I go through the class. This is getting a little bit, getting a little bit much, and I'm sort of getting interested in getting into my example here. So, right, people face trade-offs. That's implied. That scarcity imposes that on everybody. If nothing else, your time is scarce, right? And so you have to make decisions with all of these things in mind, right? But what I'd like to do is just show you how we can combine this idea with a little technique here. So this is a little sample calculation, and what I'm gonna do is just kind of walk you through a technical concept. Expected value, right, is going to be the concept. By the way, you won't have to know this for an exam or anything. And then I'm just going to show you how we can apply this concept when we look at people's decisions, right, to back something interesting out of it, right? So technical idea or technical method, we watch what people do, and then we see what their decisions are, and then when we observe their decisions, we can infer certain things about the way the world works from this. So that's the idea here, and really what I'll do is maybe I'll just kind of work through this. Let me, you know what, I brought a little notepad here. I brought all these little things, you know, to prepare for my first lecture here. It turned out what I really needed was a Mac. And okay. Okay, so I think I'm gonna, I don't really have a good notepad, so we'll see how this goes. That's going to be too small. Let me try this. And maybe a little bigger, right? Why not? Good. Okay. So expected value. Let's first think about this idea, a technical concept. What is the expected value? Well, it's what you expect, or I could say it this way, the numerical outcome you expect on average to happen. I didn't say it at all well already. When you encounter a situation with some randomness, right? So you can think about it this way. If there's dollars involved, and in our example there will be, it's the average amount you earn from engaging in this experiment, right? So one example of an expected value, well, let's think of a very simple one. Let's suppose we play a game where I'll flip a coin here. Do I have a coin? I do, actually. I don't have to do it, but I could flip a coin. If it comes up heads, right, I give you $1, right? If it comes up tails, I don't give you anything, right? And so then this is obviously, there's some sort of implied return here, right, that you would get out of this. And the question is, what is it, right? What would you, in expectation, think that you would earn from this game? So we could do this any number of ways, right? I could play the game with each of you, just go down the rows here and flip a coin. If it comes up heads, you get $2. If it comes up tails, sorry, $2, sorry, random, right? And then I could just sort of take the average payoff that everybody got in the classroom, right? And that would be something like the average amount I paid out or the expected value. Yes? Okay. In this case, right, all you have to do, I mean, we could do the experiment and figure it out that way. An alternative would be to just kind of use some theory to figure out what this is. And it turns out there's a pretty good formula for this. And I'm not going to, I'll just say you multiply probabilities times the value, well, that doesn't sound really, multiply probabilities and outcome values and add up. So that's kind of the simple, formula as I might understand it. In my example, well, let's see, what is the probability the coin comes up on the $2, I should say on heads? Well, if it's a decent coin, it seems okay. The probability that it lands on heads is 1/2, right? In that event, you get $2. So that would be what you would get. The probability of that outcome happening, of a head, times your return there. And then what we could do is we could say, well, there's also a probability that you get nothing, right? So we have to think about that as well. 1/2 times 2 plus 1/2 times 0, right? And then if we did this out, well, we would get 1/2 times 2, and that equals 1, right? So the expected value of my little flip a coin, give you $2 game is $1. How do you want to think about that? Well, on average, a person makes $1 from playing this game. You could also think about it if you played this game repeatedly over time, how much you would make. And of course, you could also think about different sorts of things. It doesn't just have to be 2 probabilities, right? It could be a whole bunch of things, right? Once again, none of this is hugely important for any I'm just going to illustrate this, except
anything. I'm just trying to illustrate a basic concept.
Another quick example, I'll just make it up off the top of my head. You might be thinking about a stock price, right? A stock price is a notorious random variable that we're always very interested in as economists. And maybe you're sort of thinking about, how much money on average you would expect to earn. So maybe there's a 1/4 of a chance that the stock increases by 2%. There's a 1/2 chance that it increases by 4%, and maybe a 1/4 chance that it increases by, let's say, 8, right? So you know that the next year, it's a simple example. Next year, or over the course of the next year, you'll either get 2%, 4%, or 8%, and then the question is, what is the average return? So here we have 3 outcomes and 3 probabilities, right? Same formula applies. By the way, one thing that you perhaps maybe know about probability, or probabilities in general, you'll see that, I'm not that clever, but I'm clever enough to make sure that they always add to 1, right? So that's something probabilities have to obey. They have to add to 1. And that'll be important for our example here. Anyways, so same exact idea. We would say here my expected return is, let's see, 1/2. That's 1/4 times 2, plus 1/2 times 4, that's, plus 1/4 times 8, that's 2. You would say it's 4.5, right? If I could type there, that doesn't look great. As the expected return. Hopefully you're getting the idea, right? Now, of course, you might be one thing you might be thinking to yourself is like, well, wait a minute. You just, you said the expected value is what happens when you do this thing a lot with a bunch of people. That's what happens on average. Well, here it's a little bit different, right? You'd have to sort of imagine that this stock is sort of played out this way, over a course of 50 years or something. Or you can imagine if you were to observe its return over a long period of time, on average it would be about 4.5%. Okay, what does this have to do with economics? This is just math, it's statistics. It's early in the morning, it's dark in this room, maybe you're falling asleep now. Okay, well, let's get back to this idea here, and we'll think about insurance, right? An insurance problem. So, or a probability of a loss here. And so let's think about this way. So imagine that you've graduated from Hunter as an economics major, and you've gotten a job at a finance firm, and you've made a lot of money, so you buy a house on the beach, right? Now you have to sort of think about insuring the house, or how likely how much you would pay for insurance, things like that. Well, the first thing you might want to do is think about what sorts of losses you might have, say, from storm damage, stuff like that. So maybe you run the numbers, or you look at past events, whatever, I don't know. But you figure out that you say, well, let's see. 1 out of every 20 years there's a bad storm and my house sustains some damage. So if I'm using what Baker described here, I could say the probability of damage for my beach house that I've gotten is 0.05, 1 out of 20, right? There's a 5% chance, put another way, in any given year that my beach house will have damage, right? And let's suppose that in the event that there are damages, that my loss is $100,000, right? So that's what it would cost. And now I have to sort of think about what I would pay for insurance. Now, think about how insurance works. You pay something for certain up front, right? And then in the event that there's a loss, you just get the money right back, right? So, I mean, I know that's not how it works in practice, but if we sort of abstract from, having to make a claim and call Geico or whatever, and you just imagine how it would work in a perfect world without friction, maybe kind of our physics hats there, we can say, all right, well, if a loss occurs, they send me a check for $100,000. Yes?
Wouldn't it be 0.5 instead of 0.05?
Well, what did I say, 1 out of 20?
No, it's 1 out of 2, because everything's 50-50, it happens or it doesn't.
Oh, okay, that's a good point. Well, no, I'm going to use that, but I would say that everything happens or it doesn't is different than it being 50-50, right? So in this case, but that's a great point you've made, and you've asked that question at the perfect time. So the probability of damage is 0.05, but I have to think about what the other possibilities, right? Put another way, I have to, just by technique, make sure my probabilities add up to 1, right? So I would say the probability of no damage would then have to be 95%, right? And now you can say something happens or something doesn't. It's not 50-50 because it's only 1 out of every 20 years, right? But this would be the way we kind of impose this idea that probabilities have to add up to 1, right? Now, we can take our newfound technique and we can think about the expected damages, right? Expected loss, we'll call it. How does this work? Well, let's see, exactly the same as it works in those other cases. We would say, well, let's see. In one state of the world where there is an accident, right, a big storm comes along, there's a 0.05% chance of this happening. And in which event I lose $100,000. So notice I'm not doing returns here, I'm doing losses, right? And then with 0.95% of a chance of 0.95%, right, or 95% I should say, what happens? Well, nothing. I don't lose anything, right? So in this way I compute my expected loss. By the way, if you understand this, you're well on your way to becoming an actuary, right, which is a pretty lucrative and interesting profession, right, the mathematics of insurance. More on that in a second. Okay, so if I do this calculation out, who can tell me what I get? I did it. I know it's early. It's the first class. I'll answer my own question. If we do this out, we find that the expected loss is 1,000. Or 5,000, I'm sorry. Okay, so fair enough, right? Now, from an economics perspective, all of this is just a little bit of probability and statistics, and I apologize for subjecting you to this on this cold January morning. But suffice it to say, we could say something interesting about this particular person and whether or not they would buy insurance, whether or not you would buy insurance. And the answer might be something like, well, I'm not going to pay much, I shouldn't really buy it unless it costs something less than 4,000, 4,000, 3,000. 5,000 is about my pressure point here, right? Maybe I'd pay a little more just to know that I wasn't going to, have this variability. But we can talk about what the value is maybe of insurance through this calculation. Let's do something a little bit more interesting here and think about what happens when we don't necessarily know all this stuff, right? So now once again you have your nice, you have your job that you've got because you're this economics major. You have a family now and you're looking to buy a new car, right? You go down to the car dealership and, I'll take this Mercedes or whatever. And the dealer says, well, we have a new safety feature this year. It's extra safe. What it will do is it will reduce the chances that you're killed in an accident over the next, year, we'll say, by 0.001 of a percent, right? So, and you say, oh, well, it's unlikely I get in an accident anyways, and, then you're telling me the probability I'm killed is this. Okay, I know it's not zero. That's a little bit scary. So it's always good to have more, right? And then you say, and the dealer says, well, there is a catch. It costs a little bit of money to have this new seatbelt feature, right? In my things here, I have this. I have a cost of $1,000. So you can upgrade the safety of your car, say, for $1,000. And what does this get you? Well, it gets you a reduction, right, of 0.001 in the chance that is that what I had? 0.0001 of the chance you're killed in this accident. And you think about it and you say, well, $1,000, and you say, you know what, no thanks. I don't want this safety feature. Most of the time you say, well, they're always trying to sell you stuff when you go to the car dealership. An economist would say, aha, we've learned something interesting about the value that you attach to your own life from you having done this, right? Same math, right? We can say that what you're getting, right, is a change in the expected loss, right, the value of the expected loss. Well, let's see here. We would say that it would be 0.001 times, well, I'll just call it V. We don't know what it is yet, right? So V is how much the value that you attach to your life. 0.0001 is the chance that you're killed, or what you would gain, right, or what you would lose from an accident. This is in some sense the expected costs you will incur over the year if you don't buy this feature, right? Well, by the same token, it costs $1,000, right? And what you decide is you say, well, you know what? This $1,000 is too much that I'm spending. So let's see here. What does this mean to the economist? Well, it means because you didn't buy the feature, that the thing over here, this change in loss, is less than the $1,000 you'd have to spend today, right, on the car. Well, you're probably looking at this and saying, wow, you can't put there's no number there. Well, it turns out we can solve this equation for V, right? And in this sense, we would get V, well, we don't solve for it exactly, but we know that it's less than, well, let's see here. 1,000 divided by 0.001. What is that? 10 million? I'll put in some comment. Oop, not there. We know that V, because of this equation, because of the decisions that you made, right, when confronted with these two things, we can then pin down a number for V here, which is the value that you place on your own life, right? So this may be shocking, or you might sort of think that it's weird to do this, but suffice it to say, these sorts of calculations are behind the statistical value of a human life, right? And it might also surprise you that people make these sorts of decisions all the time, right? Through your choice of career, you sort of think about wages and risk, right? So if you choose a dangerous job, maybe, I don't know, being a fireman or something, versus something else, you have to sort of have this do these calculations in your mind. And indeed, this underlies what we call the statistical value of a human life calculation, which figures in all sorts of things. Whenever you see a civil suit, medical malpractice, all sorts of things like that, right? This is where they get those numbers that they use. Yes?
But wait, wouldn't you be able to make that $1,000 back along? Because a safer car means a lower insurance deductible, meaning that since there's less of a chance of you needing the insurance. So
fair enough.
Could you factor that in?
You could, right? I guess maybe that's part of the point, is that my highly stylized example here, and this is a good time to say this maybe, my example is highly stylized, and it depends a lot upon its assumptions, right? So you might quibble with some of them. I'll give you some others in a second. But you could also make it more and more complex, right? If you wanted to, you could say, well, let's see here. If I spend the $1,000, I get my insurance goes down like this. The probability of you can add in all these different variables that you want. The basic principle will remain the same though, right? And that's kind of what I was trying to show you. But that's a good question. Indeed, a lot of what we do, next time in class, we'll talk about building models, is we make simplifying assumptions about how the world works to uncover these basic principles. Then what you can do is you can go in and you can say, well, let's add in some details that make this a little bit more difficult, while now understanding the basic idea, right? So hopefully that kind of attacks that question a little bit. You might also say, well, what about just affordability, right? What if you said, Baker, your story said I was rich and I had money and I could buy a Mercedes and I didn't do this. What if you just don't have the money? It's an interesting complication too, right? You can see that one thing that will happen here is you'll automatically start sort of assuming things like poorer people put less value on their lives, right? That might make you uncomfortable, and it should. But once again, part of the point is that when you break things down and think about the general principle, things become clear to you in a way that they wouldn't otherwise, right? We'll be doing a lot of that as the semester goes on. So, and maybe I can say that the stakes are a little bit higher as we move along, and that my examples here have involved some, or at least this last one, involved this person just doing what's best for them, right? Now, it turns out that this idea that people do the best for themselves is a pretty important idea, right? That people are rational. And if you think about this from the perspective of society, you might find it troubling, right? That everybody's out to do the best for themselves. This is an age-old question in economics. And you can even think about, I have the name Adam Smith here, was kind of the father of the idea, I guess you could say, that the pursuit of self-interest is in fact good for society, right? The idea that you're out there trying to make as much money as you can and buy things as cheaply as possible and do the best for yourself. If everybody does that, Adam Smith said, buying and selling things in markets, then generally speaking, this is the best possible outcome for society, right? This market-based interaction of people doing what they can for themselves. Suffice it to say for now, though, that we might wonder about this. Are there conflicts of interest between individual interests and those of society, right? And that's a puzzle that we'll hopefully be shedding light on as the class moves along. And I can confess it right now, part of my ulterior motive in this day and age is to maybe push back against the notion that markets are not, markets are trying to screw you over at all times, and maybe support the idea that a lot of times you get what you want because there's a market, right? And that's the single best possible way for you to get what you want, is to have it work through a market. Okay, well, as we sort of parse through these examples, kind of like the one I just discussed, we'll be able to shed light on some other questions, like what is value? It may seem dumb for you to even think about this, but this is actually an age-old question. When you talk about how valuable something is, what the hell does that mean, right? How valuable is a cup of coffee or a college education or a seatbelt, right? All of these things we'll have to think about, and we'll be able to get answers for these things. So, everybody has, throughout history, I mentioned I taught history of economic thought. A lot of people have had differing views on this. Karl Marx is one. Ancient Greek philosophers were others. And it does kind of move into this idea about fairness, which I found, I used to not think about this much as a professor, but I found that students tend to really care a lot about what is fair, right? And how we judge something to be fair or not. And that this has a lot to do with why people think about value in markets the way they do. So we will see, or I'm hoping to make a case for you that don't hate too much on the markets, right? And that they do provide a great way of organizing economic activity, as chaotic as they seem, right? And how they decide what is produced. Decide is kind of a weird word to use there. What is consumed, what is made, what isn't, all of that stuff. Not always, but often, right? Another big idea is that trade makes people better off, right? In general, everybody, right? So there isn't a winner and a loser from an economic trade. And so we're going to talk about all of these things, and I'm also going to try and make a case that markets are fair in some sense as we move along. So just to give you a quick example that kind of says a little bit of, maybe two examples here. How am I doing on time anyway? I know I started a little late there. Oh, I'm killing you guys. You thought we would just hand out the syllabus and you would leave. I'll wrap it up here. Okay, so a senior student, imagine, has a textbook. This is I have to change this example because we have Top Hat now. But remember the old days when we had textbooks, and the senior here has used this book and likes to have a book but doesn't really need it. They place a value, we'll say, of $10 on this book. Meanwhile, an incoming student says, well, I haven't taken the class yet. It would be great if I had a copy of the book. They place a value at $50 on this book, right? Now, just think about what happens then if you sort of think about those two numbers and you imagine a trade, right? A sale of the book, right? I have $30 as a price here. It's just right between 10 and 50. So senior sells the book to the incoming student at $30. Well, you know, maybe you don't think about it this way. An economist would look at that and say, wow, both people have gained $20 in value, right? Both people have realized a surplus from this trade, right? Person one, right, who sold the book, now has $50 they can spend on something else, and they gave up something, $30, and they gave up something they only valued at 10. 30 minus 10 is $20 of surplus, right? Meanwhile, incoming student buys something they value at 50 for a price of 30. So they've gotten something they value at 50 and given up $30. They now have 20 additional dollars of value. Everybody gains here, right? By the way, notice that the exchange has allowed the book to flow from a low value of $10 to the high value of $50, right? So in some sense, the market here, this market exchange, has allowed the book to flow from a low valuing use to a high valuing use, right? So from the perspective of society, we would step back and say, that's a good thing, right? We've allocated the book to a better use or a higher value use. And indeed, we're going to use that principle a lot during the course of the class. You can also use it for examples like this one, which students tend to sort of think about a little bit differently, where you have a retail store, right, which moves merchandise $300 an hour, and you have a unit of time you value at 10. I have to readjust these numbers. There's been, you know, the wage is a lot higher. Let's change this to 30. Right? So $10, why do you have a low value for your time? Maybe you're just sitting around, fiddling with your phone. You could do that at the store, right? So you place a low value on your time at $10. That's the value of doing whatever it is you want. Whereas the store is moving $300 of stuff an hour, the same principle will apply. The store pays you $30, right? You walk away with $20 of surplus value. The store, of course, here gets $270 of surplus value. So there are benefits. They seem a little bit asymmetric. Is that something to worry about? Does that bother you? I don't know. Maybe. We'll talk about that too. All of these things. So I've kind of brought it to the conclusion here. And, you know, you can start the process of just, you know, have a look at the syllabus, familiarize yourself with Top Hat a little bit. It's still the first week, so you don't have to kill yourself with this stuff. I'll remind you, you know, in a couple weeks we'll have to start getting serious. But for now, it's okay to just take it easy. Any questions you might have, you can fire me an email or otherwise. But next time we'll talk more about this idea of an economic model, and what I mean is simplifying things to their essence in a way we can understand what the moving parts are, and then taking that generalization to understanding things. So I will leave it at that. See you Thursday.